Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a few minutes once everybody's filtered into the room. So hang tight. Just a few more minutes. We'll get started. Thank you all for coming. All right, I think I see attendance is sort of slowing down, so I'll just get started and people will continue to filter in if they will. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jean from Greenlight, and we are thrilled to host tonight's event with Amanda Larson, who is launching her debut collection of poems, Gut. She will be reading and talking alongside Diana Khoi Nguyen and Hannah Seidlitz, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Amanda, Diana, Hannah, the team at Omnidawn for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up tonight. Although we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We are grateful for your support and for the chance to make for conversation and connection. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon at the bottom. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat, which is a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with your fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author or any of the readers tonight, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions at the end of the night, only from the Q&A module to be answered later in the later part of the program. So if you type your question into the chat, it might get lost in the wash. And most importantly, tonight's featured book, Gut, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. The book has yet to hit our shelves, but you can order it online at greenlightbookstore.com for future pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I will drop the buy link in the chat and drop it again multiple times over the course of the evening, so make sure to get a copy. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. And now a few words to introduce our featured readers. Hannah Seidlitz is an NYU MFA Axon Fellow and fiction reader at the New Yorker. They were the 2021 recipient of the Columbia Journal Winter Prize, selected by Gia Tolentino. Their work appears in LitHub, Long Reads, Hobart Pulp, Electric Literature, and elsewhere. And next, we have poet and multimedia artist Diana Khoi Nguyen, who is the author of Ghost of and recipient of a 2021 fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. In addition to winning the 92Y Discovery Poetry Contest, the 2019 Kate Tufts Discovery Award, and the Colorado Book Award, Diana was also a finalist for the National Book Award and the LA Times Book Prize. A Kundiman Fellow, she is core faculty in the Randolph College Low Residency MFA and an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. And last but not least, our featured author tonight is Amanda Larson. Amanda is a writer from New Jersey and an MFA candidate in poetry at New York University, where she teaches undergraduates. Her first book, Gut, was selected by Jericho Brown as the winner of the Omnidawn First Second Book Prize and is forthcoming in October of 2021. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Michigan Quarterly Review, the Adirondack Review, Washington Square Review, and other publications. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. Amanda's prize-winning new book was selected by Jericho Brown, as I mentioned, who described the book as not an easy read, instead a necessary read. In an unflinching interrogation of how a young woman maintains agency in the wake of trauma, violence, and desire, Larson spins a conversation between works of feminist theory and her own experiences, moving through her own recovery while questioning the limits of the very term and of language as a whole. So Hannah, Diana, and Amanda are going to start us off with a reading, and then they'll be talking with each other and all of you. So without further ado, please take it away, friends.
Thank you all for being here to celebrate the launch of Amanda's brilliant, fantastic new book, which I encourage all of you to order through Greenlight. It is truly everything that Jericho Brown, among others, have said. It's an honor to be reading here, to support her, and to celebrate this special night. So without further ado, I'm going to be reading the beginning of the piece that is in the Columbia Journal called Notes from Underground. So this is just sort of the first section of the piece. Notes from Underground. She approaches me at a party, tells me he handcuffed her to his dining table and left her there for 10 hours. Said he'd thought she had the key. His mistake for forgetting to remove it from his breast pocket. Her eyes are the kind of green that makes you sorry to be looking for so long, matte and immovable, not like mine, gray and protean. There's a distantness about her, surprising dispassion for someone as young as she is. She looks tired. She doesn't cry or even flinch as she recounts this to me, as though explaining the plot of a movie she watched almost too long ago to recall the actor's name. She takes a sip of her beer, offers me one. There's a cooler on the stairs, she says. Just throw a few bucks in the cup holder. I thank her, but do not move right away. I stay in her placid stare, wanting something to happen, wanting for us to embrace one another or break down. Isn't that what we deserve? United by the same violent touch. But we aren't sisters, nor are we friends, and in many ways our relation was, for the longest time, exclusively adversarial. Well, see you, I say. Yeah, she says, see you. It is difficult to defend the subordination of safety to desire. I think of Bart. Quote, someone tells me this kind of love is not viable, but how can you evaluate viability? Why is the viable a good thing? Why is it better to last than to burn? Unquote. I believed my love for Z to be selfless because there was nothing to be gained from the way I suffered. I believed that anything experienced so utterly, so wholly as to obliterate and replace all other needs would raise the ego. Selfishness, I had thought, was a matter of agency. If one was suffering, or worse yet, if one did not know what one wanted and behaved in deference to the desires of another, how could any act be selfish? I hadn't yet learned about penance. I hadn't yet learned the difference between masochism and indemnity. I hadn't learned that often agony can feel like absolution, a zeroing of the karmic scales. Nevertheless, undergoing needless pain is not a means to make amends for past harm. I understand why one would like to think so. If this were true, then we could be passive in the redemption of our sins. A Vietnam veteran visited campus to give a lecture about the invisibility of post-traumatic stress disorder. Z went. I knew by then that he'd long endured textbook pathologies from a car accident he narrowly survived at 15. I told him not to go, but Z enjoyed pain just as much as he enjoyed inflicting it, for the same reasons I did. In this way, we weren't so different. Later that night, he wasn't answering his phone. His window was illuminated. I could see from my own, but the shades were drawn. He was dangerous, I knew. He ministered to his self-destruction like a caged snake. It was an interesting set piece until he lost control of it. His suite mate, Byron, noticed me pacing outside their dorm and let me in. He told me Z had gotten home an hour earlier and hadn't looked good. Real 1,000-yard stare, Byron had joked. I didn't find this amusing. I could smell drugs under the door, earthy and stale, despite the towel he'd laid to clog the airflow. Z hadn't yet admitted to having a problem, but it didn't need to be acknowledged in order to be obvious. This was the tricky thing about pot. You could get high multiple times a day, every day, the way he did, and still defend its essentially non-addictive properties. You can't become dependent on marijuana. This is a tired truth, but it bears repeating. There are a lot of things that become habitual, whose thrall is not chemical. I laid my hand flat on his door, undaunted by Byron's curious eyes, and pulled my fingers into a fist to knock. But what was there to say to him if he answered? I sighed, retracted my knuckles from the wood, and pulled away, directing Byron a resigned half smile before disappearing back down the hall, then out into the night. When I returned to my room, tracking the spore of my loneliness across the dorm, I threw myself down on the bed, wailing into the floral duvet my father had picked out for me from a catalog. There were many nights like this, in which the knowledge of Z's pain and my own helplessness ravaged my insides like a rotor. This was what it meant to feel yourself alive, and therefore to love, I decided, and I never wanted it to end. When I have failed in the past to tell this story, I have fallen prey to the useless narrative that these dynamics of pain and guilt are complicated. They are ugly, but they are not very complicated. What I can tell you now is this. Z was repulsed by his sadism as much as I was thrilled and relieved by my subjugation. Hegel writes about this, so I do not need to. In some tellings, he is the villain. In some, I am. I'm no longer interested in moralism. It is naive to suggest that you cannot love someone to whom you wish to cause pain. If that were so, what a different world we would live in. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
That was so good, Hannah. Thank you so much. I was just like jotting down so many things that were reverbing for me. Yeah, united by the same violent touch. Nevertheless, undergoing needless pain is not a means to make amends for past harm. All of these things, I think, resonate in all of our works from what I know and feel. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to listen. And I can't wait to hear Amanda read from her new work, her new book. And we're now pressmates. Congratulations, Amanda. I wish we were celebrating in person, that we could kind of like lunch on cookies, you know, with people here in the audience. I'll just pretend that we're doing that. I think in the spirit of just celebration and like the vulnerable work that I know is going to be here in this room that we have already heard, I'm going to read some new work, but I'll start with a kind of a poem that always makes me feel really, I don't know, what's the word? Like I wouldn't want to read in front of my mother. That's the feeling that I read. So I'll read one poem from the book and then some new work, and then we'll hear from Amanda. All right. An empty house is a debt. 1. There is a house in me. It is empty. I empty it. negative space, the only native emptiness there is. There is two. An alarm goes off. It goes on and on. When the alarm drifts to different parts of the room, I realize that alarm is the sun. 3. And there is no one who does not need, never an empty seat. And the blind one, he does not find a place. There is a God in him, helping him to need himself. 4. A mother sticks a spoon into my chest, which is an empty bowl actually. So the spoon lands quickly and loudly. Heartbreak in the heart, she says. 5. I reach inside my empty house, as far as I'm allowed to go. I reach outside my empty house, as far as I'm allowed to go. 6. Or don't love me. What do I care? I'm tired of feeling guilty. I am tired of running up a tab. I want to run outside with a sack of huge penises on my back into the empty houses of ex-lovers, of mothers, birds screaming out my name. A human terrifies. A human is someone who becomes terrified, and having become terrified, craves an end to her fear. This craving carves a cave. 7. What is a maze if there is nothing to find in the maze? I find myself angry at nothing. 8. My lovers bow before me as though before Medusa. Tell them you love them. See what they say. Or say it to yourself and see what you say. When you love someone more than you've ever known you could, it is a good thing, except for the terrifying realization that one day there comes a parting. I'm going to read some work from this kind of new book. I don't know what to call it, so I don't call it anything. For lack of a better word, I just call everything that I'm writing in this project Doi Moi, which I translate from Vietnamese essentially to like a new phase, new year, new time. But it means something very specific in terms of the economic reforms that occurred in the late 80s, early 90s in Vietnam. And there's some Vietnamese words. I'm not fluent in Vietnamese, so bear with me. Okay. Doi Moi. On an American billboard in 1975, 2 hands are cracking a white egg against a black backdrop. The yolk glistens mid-flight, identical in hue to the golden arches printed beside it. Mid-flight, my father absently stares at his brother's leg, which may or may not contain a bullet wound. Though he is sitting still, he is moving faster than he ever has before. Back in his homeland, half of me exists inside an egg my mother hasn't yet expelled. Together, we are rounded up, moving north to re-education camp, where she will encounter gruel instead of chow, flies instead of rice. The flies gather around her bowl like photojournalists racing to the execution of a Viet Cong officer on the streets of Gia Long. Gia Long, or Big Market, is the largest Chinatown in the world. Despite Vietnam's persecution of the Chinese following a border war in 1979. If you treat someone ill enough, they will try to leave. Before this war, there was another war. Before that war, another war, yet another one, and another, et al. War to the nth power. I say et al, which translates to and others, instead of etc, because there are many authors to war, and the line of wars and their authors is too long to entangle here. War to the nth power, to the power of author, to the power of n. To type a superscript, you have to press Control, Shift, Command, plus sign. The first three keys are clustered near one another. War, Control, Shift, Command plus War, Shift, Control, Command plus War, Command, Shift, Control plus. The order in which they occur doesn't matter. The result is the same. War to the nth power. The first time I heard Viet Cong, I thought I heard Viet Cong, which is exactly what I was, a Vietnamese child. A child precedes and follows the war. We use different words for during. Hostage, soldier, victim, shooter, killer, Charlie, body beside, body below, parts of the body. Is it worse if the child goes unnoticed, dead or alive, intact or in parts? In my country, my mother says, a child shows love by listening to her parents without question. But what if the parents are wrong? Okay. And then I'm just going to read a piece from another series. I call them my little prose bricks because they just look like blocks of text. So excited, Amanda. Oh, I don't even want to read anymore. Okay. At the site where the wound will occur, we know that she was in the garden, the one that she had cultivated seed by seed, shortly after moving in with her husband and their 11 children, all of them together again after years of separation. Her husbands and sons beat in America, her daughters and hers in Vietnam, first in Saigon, then a place unmentioned by the coast, underground, in hiding, waiting to make a successful bribe so they might board a vessel, any vessel, collective bride in dark waters, facing an unknown stage. Boom, boom, she whispered to my mother. Butterfly, the word my mother used to reference our genitals, two cupped wings like a heartbeat. Boom, boom. In hiding all that year, unmentioned by the coast, my mother as a young girl had her first period, its dark liquid unseen in their nest underground. Boom, boom. The smear of red between my thighs, perfectly symmetrical. Two lips pressed together, as if to kiss or to strike.
Thank you so much for that, Diana. And thank you to Hannah as well. That was so incredible. I saw Diana read in 2019 when I'm in California at the Kingsley Tufts Award ceremony, and I had just started writing Gut at that point, and it completely blew me away, your reading, and it really, at the Huntington Library, and it just, it really inspired me to continue writing. So I'm so grateful that you were able to read tonight, and Hannah, you as well. That essay is one of my absolute favorites. Thank you so much to everyone for coming and for being out here to celebrate. I also wish we could be in person, but this is still incredible. And I was able to get people who could absolutely not be here in person to come. So that's amazing. I'm seeing so many friends from just all over, friends and family. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to be reading a few poems from Gut. I'm going to be reading some of my Q&A poems, which are lineated poems, and then some prose blocks. I might share my screen for the prose blocks if that's okay, because I just finished the formatting and I really like how it looks. And there's a paper shortage, so no one actually has it right now. But it will be coming in a few weeks, I believe. So the first poem I'm going to read was originally titled Green Beach, but it took on a different form in the book. Okay. Q, but you must have known the shape of a night. A, Usually there's a pack of gloss co-eds, their smiling jowls bared, cackling as if hyenas who have gained a whiff of prey, but tonight they're gone. Rather, two of us speak as we shuffle our feet across the blades of black grass, the night pregnant and circling. Ahead, a blonde squares her steps. Light funnels out from a room on the corner of a dorm, out of a building I call motel style, coated with unhinged orange doors. Inside, we see Maya's body, buoyant on a rancid couch, her body enveloped in sweatpants, and a young man standing in front of her, laughing as she jumps circus-like. The blonde notices, turns toward the light like a mosquito deluded. She croons, "You guys just look like you are having so much fun, like so much fun. Have a good night." She leaves. Maya laughs. Her boyfriend nods. I spent all of last year trying to get other people to like them. My friend purses her lips, our arms knit as we walk farther. We are going to a party, curious if we can make the most of it. Then she asks, "Do you think our darkness is fundamentally different from Maya's darkness?" The question isn't of presence. We know logically Maya's experienced something, life has fallen or failed, tasted loss. Know that the silent poses she holds in the photographs online do not represent who she can be. Still, my voice is anxious, my friends a tone I rarely encounter. It is not the acknowledgement of the act by that impetuous blonde either. We agree on this. How many times each of us could recount our stomachs stretched out in the backseat of a car, or a forced unconscious laugh erupting from the feeling of a thumb pressed to the throat. Once we reveled in it. Now we have questions of fundamentals, of the use of our bodies and the creation of guilt. There's a stinging desire in the drugged air, and we both feel it then, the hauling eyes of the moon. So that's the first one. And I'm going to share my screen for the second one. Yeah. I'm going to read a couple pages here. This is a quote by Cathy Caruth, by the way, who I just adore. Forgetting is indeed a necessary part of understanding, Cathy writes. Eventually, I stopped speaking of what happened. I reintroduced silence. I don't know where the words went. At some point, I must have put them down. Q, what is the use of a tool when, in using, it changes its form? A, there was a woman once with whom I spoke about my production value. I spoke to her every Thursday, walking my body over to her office and setting it down on her plush couch. Perhaps she would say, stirring her tea and putting it to the side, "You deserve X because you are a human being and because you are alive." My timelessness did not seem to occur to her. Rather, she had decided that regardless of what one experienced, they could, at the least, believe in a linear pattern, believe in a cause and effect, a bell and a reward. I had once believed this too, except I had worked for it, worked to be the bell. But when I could no longer do so, what mattered was that there was an award anyway, which was I was alive. In movies, the moments of joy are condensed to montage. Success is played out over the course of 3 minutes. To spend any longer on it is to endure risk, that of stagnancy or boredom. But I feel now the privilege of no longer enduring such immediacy of experience, to forget the palm that rested on the back of my neck. In moments, I can even lose the memory of its feeling. When explaining his poem, "You Are Jeff," Richard Seikin states, "Everyone in the world, including the speaker and the reader, is named Jeff. With only one identity, each part of the world must now define itself in relation to its other parts, rather than as a standalone thing independent of context." After those things happened to me, this became abundantly clear, that even with the blind light of the sun piercing through my eyelids, I would consider him. Take, for example, 3 dogs at home, and I am with my mother in a sterile house by the beach. My father's family has taken its shift for the week, and its windows are wide, a view of the still ocean constantly pouring in. My relatives circle as my mother rouges the raw meat with breadcrumbs, immerses the cuts in a bubbling crimson sauce. I know they want, but she has always taught me how to work when watched, and in doing so, to create a mode of joy. In August, I move into a house. It is filled with light. Of course, at times the house was very dark. At times it was no color at all. But it has been a year since those things happened, and I want to allow myself this, the sun illuminating dust, its heat independent and palpable. I want to allow myself to name it, while admitting that to name it is, at times, to lie. In the house, I live with a friend, but in living with her, I do not live with her, I live alone. Not to say she is never present, she is frequently, and we will speak for hours, our words punctured by strange cyclical laughter. But I've known her for so long, I effectively live alone. She is so close to me that she is a part of it. If someone were to ask me about her, I wouldn't know what to say. I'm gonna stop at that part, and then I'm going to read one more last Q&A poem. I'm going to stop the screen share there, though. Yeah, okay. This is my last one. Q, who is going to make amends? A. It hit me as I was driving home at night from New York, a strange longing for California, its egregious sky rendered by smog, bright pink like a mouth, speaking something it wants. I wanted to fear a person the way I did there, for that was there the smallness of my life. I feared one person, a man. I was horrified of what he thought of me, watching as I turned my small leased car into my apartment, how he could see that nothing was my own. E had loved me so much that he hated me. He hated that he could not tell the story apart from the way it was told. And I told too many stories. I could sense myself like that, infringing. He was a child of film. He spoke of it like an infection, and I remember agreeing in a way I do not acknowledge. Before I met him, I was planning to move to Los Angeles, telling everyone who asked, it is so fake there, it's real. But I met him and pictured a child staring at the great white plastic of the Hollywood sign, amongst the houses that were the color of eyes, how everything there was always at risk of burning. I could not. There were ways I could categorize myself, language that collapsed my life into a film reel, entire swaths of it denigrated to just college, just the years I was West, just one night under his palm in the lamplit room. I was thinking of California and how I was running out of justs, that soon the sun there would settle into a mocked electrical night, and that this would be my life. Thank you. That's good.
Unreal. Thank you so much for reading that, Amanda. I don't know if we want to talk. Sweet.
Yeah, I think we'll chat, but
Yeah.
we'll kind of reiterate Jean's invitation to folks in the audience to put your questions in the Q&A as you collect yourselves from that reading. Amanda, oh my God, I was running out of justs. Yeah, so amazing. Okay, so I think people are still like recovering, but I have a question for us as a group. I noticed, especially since I had seen Hannah's essay before in the Columbia Journal, and also seeing Amanda's new work, that there's a kind of elliptical serial nature right through section kind of breaks and markers, whether it's through a little dot or the asterisks. And I know, Hannah, you had asterisks, and actually my own work, I'm using kind of asterisks too. So like, we're totally having these little like lily pads, right? Kind of a form. So I just want to, I guess I'm just curious, how does that kind of pausing, leaping that lack of kind of full path connective tissue, right? That there is that elliptical leap. How does that inform your composition, or how does it enable for a way to kind of contain these very big subjects about desire and trauma and legacy and agency in the things that you're thinking about? And this is a big question, and it was rolling, but I think you got the gist. So I think asking about form and content here.
Yeah,
go ahead. Yeah.
So much. I think for me, it's like I really love writing that way, and I think with Gut specifically, I wrote that way to reformulate an argument. So like each little block, I was very neurotic about it, and I was very like, it has to reach the top of the page and it has to reach the bottom of the page. I read from the later half of the book, which has this like dropping off of the fragments, because I wanted to show how like forgetting works effectively. Like there's no longer that urgency to constantly reformulate the argument. And I think, at least for me, that's how those work. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think with the idea of forgetting, and from the section that you read, the sort of necessity of forgetting, and in my piece, from which I read, it details the course of a concussion and the convalescence from the traumatic brain injury, so I needed the form to be sort of mimetic of this fragmentation and the kind of shattering of a memory, and the ways in which in the course of convalescence, you're just sort of groping for whatever images or sounds or moments you can to kind of tessellate a full picture. And I think across all three of our work, we're very interested in sort of things that are done to the body and the way that the person who inhabits that body then makes sense of what is done to it, and the way that we can, particularly as artists, use art as a kind of a way to take back the pieces of these sort of instances of external action, and make sense of the inhabitants of a consciousness inside a body that has been acted upon. And so I think the fragmentation is also a way to sort of create a body, or like a corpus that has limbs and that has different parts that are functioning differently. I mean, and even with Amanda's citing of Richard Sykin, just this idea of like one identity but atomized, and everything is then relational. I think particularly with fragments, each section is then just informing what comes before it and what comes after it. And I think that relationality, particularly with what Amanda is saying about argument, is so essential, just to the internal logic, which is a question that I would love to pose to Amanda if I can, because Amanda, would you like to read your epigraph to everyone? Share the epigraph. I'll give Amanda the opportunity, since you don't have the book in front of you, everybody.
Yeah, sure. Well, wait, before I continue, Diane, do you have anything you would
yeah.
like to,
Oh, well, the whole reason why I asked the question is so I don't have to answer. But I love hearing what both of you said. I was taking so many notes. I think yes to all of those things, fragmentation. And I love this idea that it allows a particular kind of argument to form. I think for me also, in thinking of like the atomization, sometimes when we think about memory and history, there's just too much. Like, how can I only look at one specific thing? Like, I can't behold the whole of it, right? So it's like, sometimes I always use this analogy, but it's kind of silly. When you scan a picture in your like at home printer, and then you like open up the file, but it's like the pixels are like huge,
Mm-hmm.
And then when you open the file, for some reason, it's like way bigger on your computer screen than it ever is in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like really zoomed into that one moment. And sometimes it's like, whoa, what is that? It's defamiliarized. I feel like, sorry, this is totally kind of maybe a tangent, but moving through that elliptical, leaping, fragmentary form feels like I get to isolate in a really zoomed in to see all the little pixels, the atoms of that moment. And I can just describe that part before I move my gaze, like my looking somewhere else. And then the tessellation, I think is the verb you use, Hannah, like the tessellation of all those parts. Yes, in an order, but also like kind of not, right? It's like a clumping of idea versus that things have to be sequential or linear. And it allows for a different kind of way of moving through. I'm purposely like not using a specific word because I want Amanda to read the epigraph.
Yes, please, Amanda, and then we'll talk.
No, just going out. That's amazing. I love thinking about the fragments as a way of zooming in and zooming out and being able to be very particular. I can't come up with a plot to save my life. So yeah, it's a way of establishing a mode of looking. My epigraph is, it's a Frank O'Hara quote, and it's pain always produces logic, which is very bad for you. Which I adore and feel like it really brought together a lot. When I discovered it, I was like, oh my God, and it just brought together a lot of what I was thinking about with the book, and also the way I have the prose blocks set up in the book to be a type of, not like logical proof. I'm sure there are like math people who are like, it's nothing, you know what I mean? But like a type of argument, or like going ba-da, and arriving at a very different emotional conclusion than a narrative conclusion, which is what I think great poetry does. And I love when poems do that.
I was just using this story. Okay, this is going to bring me back to middle school, and maybe you all too. Do you remember Wayside Schools? Like Lewis Sackar books? Do you know what I'm talking about? Hannah's face is like really confused. If this is like Wayside School is falling down or something like that. Is that the name?
Is the school like upside down, or like?
It's like a YA book. I can't really remember. But here, okay, the only thing I remember is there's no 13th floor. Yes, Sideways Stories from Wayside School. Thank you, Natalie. I was like, I'm not saying it right, but it's like a tongue twister. There's no 13th floor, and the kids are always freaking out because people are telling them to go to the 13th floor, and there's like, but the elevator, there's no 13th floor. But the one thing I love, and I think this relates to like, not necessarily pain logic, but maybe more like creative writing logic. As we were talking here, there was one student in the school where if you told them to count from 1 to 10, they would start with 1 and they would arrive at 10, but the journey in between was never the normative one. So it would be like 1, 8, 5, 3, 4, 6, 9, 7, 10, you know? It was like actually really hard for me to do that. But I feel like that's like lyrical, like writing logic, you know? And I see that kind of happening in both your works when it's kind of moving these elliptical ways. It's forcing us to take a different path because we can't go the same way, maybe because it's like so hard and difficult, but it's also like not possible to retrace in the same way. Anyway, thanks for letting me share that story about that kid and their counting.
Well, it's interesting because it makes me think of, I just read Survival at Auschwitz by Primo Levi. I just reread it for my craft class, and at the very outset, Primo Levi says, you know, forgive the structure of this book. It's not told chronologically, it's told in order of urgency. And I think a lot about that in particular with Amanda's book, in terms of this is what you need to know. You need to hear this first, and then I can tell you this. And I think from that urgency, from that place of I'm trying to communicate something to you, and it might not be a story, but it's a feeling and it's an idea and it's a set of arguments. And I think with the O'Hara quote in particular, this idea of logic emerging from pain or the necessity for logic, and when I was writing my piece, and I think about this a lot, I think a lot about syllogisms and about how I think that pain begets a certain kind of fallacy, like logical fallacy, where it's like, if this, then that. and we're asked, I mean, the form of Amanda's book is so hyper aware of this, but in the wake of trauma, we're asked so many questions to name our experience and to name how we feel about it and what happened, as though if we can say one thing definitively, it will then lead to the next conclusion. And from that emerges some kind of interrelated, interanimated logic. But I think the sort of point is, it's so much more complicated, because one emotional conclusion will light up or catch fire somewhere else in the story. And the things that actually inform each other and are talking to each other are not necessarily chronological or syllogistic or like logical in that way. And I think that Amanda's book captures that so well, just the callback to a certain memory or an image or a motif that reemerges to show that the things that stay with us and the things that accumulate are not necessarily just the details of the story,
Yeah, this is thank you.
I love your writing. Can you guys tell I love Amanda's book?
I really wanted the book in like, my really complex narrative thinking for the book was like, I wanted it to go from sad to happy. So I wanted it, so I consider the first half like the sad half, and then the second half is like the happy half. Obviously it's like way more complicated than that. But it was important to me to shift from those types of like, I don't even know what quantifies sad writing versus happy writing. And I read today from, I don't read publicly a lot, and I haven't read in a place like this in maybe like 4 years, and it's because I didn't like reading sad things. So I felt like, I always felt odd about the reception. Zoom is actually making this like kind of nice. But I read today from like what I consider the happy part of the book, which is really thinking about joy and like how joy can be perceived as a type of ignorance, or and I really didn't want that. So yeah,
to create a mode of joy, right? I remember that part when you read it. Yeah. I think I see Jean Larson's hand up. We can't actually, I think the attendees in the webinar format can't speak, unfortunately, but they can type. So I'm going to invite Jean to write either in the chat or in the Q&A. Don't be shy, people, like talk to us.
Yeah, ask us questions.
Ask
Amanda her favorite color. I mean, we're here.
It doesn't have to be that deep.
Yeah.
But yeah. All stripes, all colors. We do. Yeah.
Okay, this is not a question, it's mostly a comment. Somebody once said, once your book is out, like, because before it's just like with you, in you, like as if you were a kangaroo, marsupial, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's out of you. And yeah, you got to hang out with it, but like it also like exists in all these multiverses, right? It's going to go off and have all these lives with other people in bookshelves. How do you feel about that? Right? Like, it's not just a private thing anymore. This is a weird way for me to say this. But it's going to like do stuff and you're not going to know like what it's going to do, like experiences it will have in other people's minds and imaginations. And I know, Hannah, I mean, it's kind of similar, like you write an essay and it's published, like it now has its own life. I mean, this is just like the plight and also the joy of being a writer. I think it's terrifying.
It is terrifying. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm going to sound super archaic, but I wrote this paper in college on The Triple Fool by John Donne, which is a really good poem. from, you know, about a guy who's feeling this in like the 1500s, and he's like, yeah, he's like, first I'm a fool for writing it, and then he like reads it out loud to himself and he's like a fool. I might be getting this wrong, and he's a fool again, and then he like gives it out to people and he's like, and I'm the triple fool for like thinking, for opening it up to this other layer of interpretation. So I feel a little bit like the triple fool right now, but I am also really excited for it to get out there. I think I write because I think it will help people, and like before I pursued writing, the book's a little bit about this, but like I worked in politics, and I like interned in politics, and I was really considering going into that and thinking about like how I can make a difference. And I felt like this, I really had to like justify this to myself to write it. Yeah, and I'm glad I did. It's been such an interesting experience. If there's been a lot, you know, the printer's out of paper, like there's been a lot going on over the past 12 months to try and get it out, but I'm very excited for it to be out. And we've
got some questions now.
Yeah, do we
all right, so yeah, we got a couple in the inbox. Here's a question. Sam Martin asks, has a question for Amanda, which was, what was your favorite part to write when you were first drafting the book? And how do you feel you've grown since the initial draft and now its final iteration as a published work?
My favorite part of writing the first draft of Gut was writing it alongside Sam Martin. He's one of my best friends from college. But I do feel like I came to the emotional conclusion of the book quickly. So like the last page of Gut is what the last page of it has always been. So it was my senior thesis. It was my undergraduate senior thesis. And then I expanded it in the middle. And so I felt like I knew that emotional conclusion, and I had to keep on going back and really digging through the language and finding and like just making sure that I arrive at that conclusion in a way that makes sense. That's like a logical thing. So it's been expanded in that way. I had to do a lot of different things with the form, which I'm so grateful to like writers like Diana, writers like Don Lundy Martin, Claudia Rankin, like other writers who do things really experimentally with form that can guide me and show me like what words on the page can do, and how visually visual form is so important to me, and how it can work to create an emotional conclusion. So there's been changes in form with the Q&As was like a big part of that, and inserting the Q&As, which I consider like these breaths in the work. Yeah, but the emotional arc's always been the same. Yeah.
Cool. We love a spine, like a trans-dimensional spine. Next question, we have a question from Natalie Edson, who asks, I'm just going to read it. So when you were reading, Amanda, I felt that the speaker had a resistance to the linear, which makes me think about the dissolution of the argument that you were speaking about earlier. How does that dissolution of logic relate to the happiness that you wanted to arrive at over the course of the book?
That's a really good question. I think dissolution of the linear is a really interesting concept. And in order to write Gut, I read a lot of like Cathy Caruth talks about this a lot. So does Eve Sedgwick, with how trauma, Eve Sedgwick talks about this with paranoia, but I think it's a similar thing, like trauma and paranoia move backwards and forwards in time, and traumatic events move backwards and forwards in time. So it's interesting because it's like, is happiness inherently illogical? I don't know if I could speak to the relationship of logic and happiness. I think it's different for everyone. But I think for me, resisting this mode of narrative progress that I was supposed to be making, or that I was, I think we all feel the pressure of in various ways, was what made me happy. Yeah, and sort of creating my own definitions outside of the imposed logical narratives. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that in their own work. I think that's something that's very prescient in both of your works.
I feel like it's so interesting because I think that when I write, and it's interesting to hear you say that you don't like reading aloud things that are sad. And I think that that's such a sort of considerate and conscientious way to feel, like ethically as an artist. But I think I wasn't even necessarily thinking about happiness. I think the spectrum of emotional conclusion in my piece was about, because at the heart of my piece is this sort of like Hegelian question of subjugation and domination. And so for me, it was about like liberation and freedom. It was like, what does it mean? Like, how do we orient ourselves toward the sense of being free? And how do we feel? And like, what does entrapment look like, both corporeally and psychologically? And so moving instead of like from sort of pain or grief toward joy, for me, I think it was moving elliptically, as Diana has said, sort of through like a kind of liberation, but feeling the like residual, the vestiges of some kind of tether into a situation that was controlling or dominating in a certain kind of way, and how it isn't linear, in the same way that, moving from grief toward happiness is nonlinear. I think the sense of feeling like you're back in that place is what the sort of like emotional arc of my piece is about. But it is an interesting question, this question of joy, particularly with regard to Sedgwick. But yeah.
I don't have much more to add, so I'd rather actually have Amanda answer these other questions that we have in our time remaining.
So we have time for maybe just one more question. And Blake posted in the chat this question. A lot of great questions tonight, really diving deep. But so this question reads, how do you think your relationship with your speaker has changed as you've continued writing? Has it maintained / does each poem embody or use different speakers, etc.?
That's a really good question. I think it does maintain, but I think the gaze of the speaker shifts, and I think the speaker's relationship to the subject matter they are talking about obviously shifts, but shifts in a way that's throughout the book grows less critical or more less obsessive. I also think a lot about obsession, especially in the first half of the book, and it's dealing with this, obsessive patterns. And I think, and it's called Spring, sort of as a way of getting out of that winter of the obsessive patterns. So there's obviously still vestiges of winter and spring. And then in summer, it's working really, it's almost fascinated, the speaker's almost fascinated by their own forgetting of something that was so, or the breaking off of old patterns. Yeah, the first poem of Summer, which is in the second section, which is like shorter than the other section, is it just starts with "I begin to write." So that to me is like an actual beginning, while the first half is more like a compulsive meditation. Yeah. That's a great question.
Okay, such great questions, such great answers. This has been such a nourishing discussion. With that, I'm gonna call it and thank you all for such a fantastic reading and discussion tonight. And thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us. Don't forget to special pre-order your copy of Gut online at greenlightbookstore.com. Post the buy link momentarily. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thank you to Catherine for letting me use her office, and so I could go to class right after. Yeah, thank you.
Oh my God, you have class right now?
We're missing class for this. It's fine. Yeah, thank you.
Story turns.
For being so okay with me missing the first hour of class. But we'll go celebrate after.
Yeah. I wish I could celebrate. Well, maybe next time when I see you all in New York. And thank you again, Jean. Thank you to Greenlight and everybody. Yeah.
Yay,
Well,
Amanda! Woo!
yeah.
Yeah, big round of applause.
Congratulations.
Big congrats.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I'm gonna go hug you in like 5 seconds.
Okay.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.